What went into the decision to pursue Hardcore Logo beyond just the original? There's the second one that came out, and then there's the third one that ended up being Trigger.
Yeah. So there's been 3.
Yeah.
It's logo 1, 2, 3.
The unofficial.
So what was the decision to do more?
Yeah.
Well, Hugh was a big part of that. Hugh Dillon, who plays the title character in the first one. He plays the character of Joe Dick in Hardcore Logo. And there was a time when he'd disbanded the Headstones, which was his baby for many years, and he was kind of just didn't know what to do, right? So he started showing up at my place saying, "Oh, we should do like a sequel to Hardcore Logo. I love that character. It's so great." And and you know, he'd got a lot of compliments over the years of his performance, and people, you know, grew to love that movie. So we started. I said, "Well, you're dead, and you know, like I don't know what are we gonna do." So he was pitching me like, "Okay, it's in hell, you know," and I'm there drinking goat urine martinis and and I'm Joe Dick's doing stuff in hell, and I've always loved stories about hell and the devil, and so we kind of started working on this for, you know, he'd come over so he was kind of driving it, and we would bang on Noel Baker's door, the writers. Noel, you know, Hugh would have like a grand, put it in his hand, say, "They're writing this fucking movie," right? And Noel's in his bathrobe, it's 2 a.m, right? He's like, "What are you guys doing here?" Anyway, so this went on and on for quite some time, and there were quite a few incarnations of this, whatever the sequel was. And I was quite torn, because it was like, I don't really want to make a sequel. Like, what can you do? Like, you can't do it again. You can't get the guys together again and do it, because the chemistry or the time, there's a time for everything. But, you know, Hugh was fairly insistent, and it's always fun hanging out with Hugh, because he's a really hilarious guy, and he's got great ideas. So we got it to a place where I thought, I could buy this. And then he got this job on Flashpoint, where he's like this #1, and he's like this sniper cop. And, you know, the first year was like, okay, we'll shoot it during the break, and then he got this other job on this other show called Durham County. So suddenly he was like the hardest working guy, and this went on for 2 or 3 years. And then finally I said, "Hugh, I don't know if we can wait anymore," or he says, "It's okay, I'm not really crazy about the script anymore anyway." I'm like, oh God, you know, like. So I phone up Scottish Dave, who was the guy at the time writing this. I said, "Dave, I got some bad news. Like, the script we've been working on for 4 years, it's not what he wants to do. He wants to do something with Callum. He thinks the 2 of them should be in it, because at first Callum didn't want to be in it. He was like, I don't know, maybe or maybe not. He wasn't really committing." So Dave's like, "Oh, that's not good news, right?" Because Dave was working, he was over in Scotland. And so anyway, a friend of mine, Jody Calero, I was kind of depressed and thinking, wow, throw this in the garbage now. And Jody says, my daughter, she doesn't want to see some 45-year-old rock guy. She likes bands like Die Mannequin and Billy Talent. And I'm like, Die Mannequin, I just did this documentary about those guys. And Care is she's just this great visual, and they rock out. And so I phoned up Scottish Dave. I said, "Dave, can we take that script that we have, basically, keep the basic kind of idea of it, of like Joe Dick returning from beyond, you know, he hasn't died, he's just been hiding out in Africa, and he's been doing these sort of internet shows called Dr. Africa, where he had this kind of mask over his face because he's a doctor, and we just dubbed it into Swahili and stuff, right? It was this huge hit in Africa. Anyway, it's like this long kind of thing. But the basic story of the script was he shows up at my door, and he's been in hiding for 10 years, and then he wants to, go to England and tour and do this solo thing, and then he gets Bucky Haight, and they record this new album at the Scottish Castle, right? That was the sort of the thing. So Dave says, well, Scottish Dave's not really Scottish, he's actually English, but he lives in Scotland. But Dave says, well, that's no problem. Like, Dave's great. He's one of the great writers because nothing phases him. It's like, we've just lost the lead actor and character of the movie we've been working on for 4 years, but Dave can deal with it. So he comes back, he says, well, that Care Failure girl, why don't we just have her, she's inhabited by the spirit of Joe. Like, he's what do you call it? She's possessed. she claims that she's possessed by Joe, and Joe's writing songs. I'm like, well, that's fucked up, right? But it's pretty funny. So basically, that's what we did, and we sort of, I'm kind of pulled out of my sort of middle-aged television director lifestyle and kind of end up in this dance hall in Saskatchewan where we record this album with Bucky Haight. So it's sort of the same. So it's kind of amazing often when these films, you start on a project, you think it's going to be one thing, and then it ends up being like, wow, I thought we were going to make this movie with Hugh coming back from hell or from wherever he is and making this album, and then it's like, well, it's not Hugh, it's this girl and from this band that, anyway, so it always amuses me to see where things end up, because you think you got it planned, you think you got it nailed, and then the world says, well, you got it to this point, we'll just take over from here, and you gotta just roll with it. So, you try to keep some element of control, but you also kind of got to surf the wave that's kind of coming, So.
And if it ended up being Billy Talent, like the meta levels would collapse in on themselves.
Right. Well, they were supposed to be in it at one point, and then the tour schedule didn't work out, and blah blah blah. But they were pretty funny guys. So we did that, and then Hugh's still like, well, he couldn't believe that we actually shot this.
Yeah.
He was like, what? Right?
Scorned.
You just did it, right? He was kind of shocked. So he says, well, we still got to do one. We still have to do mine. So I'm like, all right, well, let's get Callum. So Callum's like, okay, great. We got McIver to write this script with, the two of them. I said, we probably won't have much money or blah, blah. So I was kind of inspired by My Dinner with Andre,
yeah,
which is a pretty awesome movie. And it's shockingly good in the sense that it's like two guys having dinner. And and so we thought, well, let's just sort of do that. So I pitched this idea to Daniel McIver, who's a Toronto playwright and really talented, super guy. And weirdly, he wrote back and he said, that's a great idea. Because he knew Callum, they'd worked together. He didn't know Hugh, but he got to meet Hugh. Anyway, so this went off. And it went on for a while. Script very quick, Daniel's super fast, and we finally got everybody together. And Hugh and Callum hadn't seen each other for a while. And we had a great read through, and then later that night I got a call, and Hugh's like, we have different ideas about what it should be. And anyway, without getting into it, because it was about these two guys who had both decided to be like Alcoholics Anonymous guys, and it's about these, because Daniel had just kind of checked into the program, and this was a really important thing to him, and he structured the script, which was quite smart, through the 12 steps of the program. So if you look at the movie, there's kind of 12 sort of unmarked but clear chapters in thematic ways of like the steps of the 12th step, right? And so then when they decided they would rather be drinking and whoring and doing drugs, which
thanks,
they're rock guys, so you can't hold that against them, right? I was again faced with this decision of like, do I throw the script away? Do I sort of fire Daniel and rewrite it? But the script was so good. Again, Daniel and I sat together and I said, well, we could maybe just, at one point we were going to make the movie but have cast like two kids as Joe and Billy, like two 10-year-olds, and have don't change the dialogue at all. Just, like a kind of Bugsy Malone thing.
Yeah.
Just have them like, cursing and talking about adult shit and, but they're 10, right?
Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah. And they're both AA. And we thought for a couple of days we were quite jonesing on this. We thought, this is great. And then we're like, I don't know, maybe not. And then we just thought, me or him said, let's make them chicks. And pretty much we were like Molly and Tracey. And without changing a lot of the script, then we just shot that. So again, it's like, what I thought was going to be a movie with Hugh and Callum, Hardcore Logo 3, turned out to be a chick movie, And again, the surprise of like the film or the project can take you and then just go somewhere else. Surprise, surprise. So we try to listen to the project, I guess, and adapt, adapt to the ever-changing moods of the project and the world and the financing and who's available and who's not, and it's kooky kind of game.
Another surprise is how it plays off of This Movie Is Broken, which came out in such quick succession. They both seem to kind of delve into Toronto in a single evening and kind of the cool, interesting things that happen, but kind of from a different perspective. Obviously, you have the fans in one, you have the artists in the other, but they're doing similar things.
That's true, yeah, because in Broken, they're fans, right? It's like when we did, and they're kind of hopeful and, wow, music's great, and, it's great to be 22 and just doing shit. Whereas the Trigger, they're like kind of bitter and kind of, hate the music business, and but at the same time, it's about friendship, or it's about people coming together and working it out. But yeah, they writers have often said to me, they said, generally when you compress the time frame, you get a lot more. The stakes are sometimes clearer, maybe higher, but often clear, and it's just that time frame of that day or that night or that week or that 4 days. There's just something great. It's quite a gift, I think, to writers and dramatists to sort of have that framework, because then you go, okay, that's the box you're in, and everything's got to happen somehow within that little time frame. So yeah, actually I hadn't thought of that they are nice little companion pieces. It's like an A-side, B-side. Yeah. Because there's a little bit of music in Trigger, and there's a lot in Broken, and there's a lot of chatting in Trigger, and not a lot in so it's that's a good double bill maybe.
One question I had about This Movie Is Broken is, a lot of people talk about Broken Social Scene. A lot of people talk about kind of the narrative of the lovers, we'll call them.
Yeah.
All three. And but there's kind of a avant-garde thread running through it as well, when you have those kind of filtered, like, grainy shots that will recur, and then there's the ending.
Right.
I was curious what went into that decision.
Like the weirdo stuff in there?
Yeah, basically.
Right?
Let's call it the weirdo stuff.
Well, sometimes you're in the editing room and you're just bored because you've seen it like 1,000 times. I remember one day in there, and I was like, what were we doing? Trying to amuse my editor, I guess, and say, okay, we were going through this footage of Toronto. We were going like, oh, we should show a couple of shots of Toronto, the waterfront, and we found some footage, and we were looking at it, and then I don't know, I was like, let's put in like a baby crying or something, and let's put that shot upside down. And the editor's like, what? And because there's nobody telling you can't, and I've always been a kind of I've always liked sort of weird experimental films. Like I kind of grew up, not in film school, I kind of was turned on to experimental cinema, right? We had this Bruce Elder, who was like our sort of genius boy wonder professor, and up until then I'd seen Clint Eastwood and Planet of the Apes and sort of regular movies. I'd never ever heard of films like these. I was like, wow, this is just nuts. But to me, they were like the closest thing to sort of punk rock music, because these were films generally made by a couple of people, not 50 people. And for us at the time in film school, these were the films that we thought we could make these films. Like, it's possible. We don't need actors even. Like, we didn't know actors, we didn't know writers, we just loved fucking around with cameras and editing, and there were all these sort of genius films, and the weird, like, this whole history of avant-garde cinema going back to, whatever, the 20s even, and the way they were talked about in school and the books and things we read, Michael Snow and Bruce Bailey and Hollis Frampton and all these amazing filmmakers, and they were more like ambient albums, so we were tremendously inspired by the fact that these could be made with a Bolex and a pack of smokes, like you could make this movie. So there's always been part of me that's carried that, I think, along. Maybe thus the split screen stuff, like the crying building, the upside down shot in Broken, the kind of some of the materialistic kind of editing techniques that I like to encourage the editors to sort of play with, like the opening of Broken, where it gets all crazy, and the film, I think, sort of stops at one point, and you're like, what? And because I think I was riffing off, it's called this Broken Social Scene, and they had a book called This Book is Broken, and we kind of stole that. So it said, this movie is broken. So I said, well, every couple times the film should just seem like it broke, or something is wrong with it. Like it's the shot's upside down, or the sound goes out, or it goes off the rails somehow. So, and because it doesn't cost a lot of money, and nobody's really going, we gotta sell it in Peoria. Like it's we feel kind of mischievous and like, wow, I can't believe we're getting away with this, right? And because it's rock and roll too. Rock and roll accepts a certain anarchy to it. You kind of want it to be a little bit raw, a little bit off the beaten track, So that was really fun to play with. Music, I've always loved music movies and videos and all that sort of thing. So music to me has always given me sort of permission to kind of do whatever you want, because as long as the music's there, you're not going to get too lost, right? So.
Yeah, because Hardcore Logo is actually a bizarrely experimental film at points, but nobody ever really picks up on that. They mostly talk about the story, or even like miscast it as kind of a mockumentary, but like there's so many just formal decisions in that film.
Oh, it's great. It's so hilarious. Like Duff Smith, who caught the logo too, I mean, there's the crazy stuff in there. And sometimes it would just be stuff that he would be just screwing around with, and I would see it and I go, that's great, let's do more, just keep that in, don't, I said, what? And just some great stuff. And so it's, because we had, again, time, we had to find the film, and that we shot so much stuff because we're shooting on these cameras. We're shooting on cameras just like this. And I'd never really shot with that light a crew before. It was like, even Tracey, we had sort of a kind of more of a formalized crew and shooting way. But with this, we kind of would shoot our day, get it in 6 hours, and then we'd have a few hours like, what do you want to shoot now?
Yeah.
So we'd interview people, we'd go shooting trees, and we'd do time-lapse stuff. And John Price, who shot it, is really amazing. He comes from experimental cinema too. Like he's a real amazing sort of photographer and just beautiful composer of images. And so, you'd let people off the leash for a little bit, a couple hours a day, and let's go shoot some close-ups of these, or I don't know, let's go outside at night. And so we ended up having all this other crazy stuff that we didn't script and we didn't really expect to get. So poor Duff was kind of saddled with, and so he's just started to play around. So the first 3 months was just fucking around time, just seeing what combinations were kind of interesting. And then once we had assessed, it was kind of like Tracey too, where we played for 3 months before even worrying about story. It was almost like, let's create the rushes and get to know the material, and then we'll, it's pretty clear, like, oh, that scene doesn't work because the acting is really bad, or it's just a boring scene, or we don't need that backstory. So you kind of work out the narrative stuff pretty quickly. And then it's, it's a crazy experimental film, like the Hardcore Logo 2, which just sort of delights me. It takes me back. I got to take it to Ryerson and show Bruce Elder. I think he would be delighted to see it. So, do you ever see a film called David Holtzman's Diary?
No.
Which was a film I saw in film school. And I guess this was one of those big revelations about fact and fiction. It was presented as this documentary. This New York guy, he's a filmmaker, he gets this new camera, he decides, his life's fucked up, and he decides, you know what, if I put my life on camera, I think I'll figure it out. Like I'll sort of photograph me, and I'll photograph my girlfriend sleeping, and I'll shoot my neighborhood, And one day he gets a new lens, and he's like following people with his new lens. And it's very cinema verite, very charming. And at the end, his apartment gets broken into, and all his stuff gets stolen, and the film has to end. And I was totally with it all the way along. And at the end, it's like screenplay Kit Carson, like I think he's made a bunch of films. Ellen Kit Carson, and who's the other guy? And I was shocked, right, that this was completely faked, right? It's completely fake. I remember being quite stunned. It's like, wow, you can use this kind of flopsy, flipsy, documentary, loosey-goosey kind of language, and it totally makes people believe that it's true. So that was part of my appeal for making Hardcore Logo 1, which was a fake documentary, and this one as well as it's like a diary, experimental, personal diary film. And there's quite a tradition in experimental films, I think, of like diary films, and this is my story, and I'm going to tell it with cinema, So anyway.